It's been said that no plan survives first contact with the enemy, a quote that can be traced back to the late 19th century, and one that's been attributed in one way or another to a number of famous individuals. The most surprising thing about this adage to me is that all these people have apparently played Gloomhaven, because if there's one thing I've learned from Gloomhaven, it's that not only will enemies foil your plans, but they'll likely do away with you too. A heavily strategic, heavily contextual turn-based RPG/card manager, Gloomhaven is punishing and capricious, a serious test of your patience and ability to plan and adapt. An ancient city setting at the edge of the world, Gloomhaven is a town of mercenaries, thugs, dark magic, and deeply held secrets. There is a lot to learn, from the nuances of one character to the synergies between characters, and how to organize all that against enemies with vastly different behaviors. Gloomhaven originally released in 2017, and to this day holds the top spot as the highest reviewed game on BoardGameGeek.com, a testament both to its excellent game design, as well as how it takes advantage of its existence as something physical. Board games have a social element that I think may be somewhat taken for granted, an element baked so deeply into the ingredients of the medium that we're often unaware it's an important part of the experience. There's really nothing like flipping a ×2 attack modifier card on your last chance to take out a boss and rejoicing around the table with your friends. Additional playable characters come in these little boxes of mystery. All you know of them is their symbol. With this comes a neat miniature figure, and inside, new abilities and intricacies to learn and implement with your other party members. When the PC version entered early access in 2019, I, as a seasoned Gloomhaven veteran, instantly became interested in how the game would translate to a digital setting. Losing that physical element as a trade-off is a bummer, though it does make gameplay more streamlined. See this crowded screen? That's all stuff you'd keep track of on your own if playing out of the box. It really makes you appreciate the systems that underpin so much of a video game, even things as standard as keeping track of your own health. The PC version also includes a digital-only Guildmaster mode that makes Gloomhaven a little more accessible and, in some sense, more player-friendly. As a digitization, Flaming Fowl Studios does a solid job animating Gloomhaven's world. It's really cool to see intimidating, living models of characters that I had previously only known as little plastic minis or cardboard cutouts. In campaign mode, some good voice acting gives a Divinity 2 feel to the colorful text that accompanies scenarios. It is extremely convenient not needing to worry about tracking enemy health, nor the bevy of status effects that can quickly invade and overwhelm a tabletop, and the fast forward button makes wading through enemy turns a whole lot easier. But the biggest differences between my playthrough of the physical Gloomhaven and my time with the digital version comes down to the dynamics of its co-op. When you're a solo mercenary, road and city events are unilateral decisions, like a mini choose-your-own-adventure. A group of bandits stops you in the road and demands you pay a toll. Do you fight them or pay the toll? That's a decision you'll make on your own. Gloomhaven is a city and world that grows and changes with your decisions, and their effects may ripple through anything from your next dungeon crawl to your band of mercenaries' reputation in the city. When you're playing with a group of people, the R in RPG can really kick in. Depending on how roly your role-playing friends want to be, road and city events become debates, and sometimes arguments, over the preferred course of action. Moral quandaries be damned. And maybe it's because your pal decides to play as a particularly surly vermling, or maybe because your party has a real disagreement about which course of action seems better. Road and city events are unpredictable, rewarding risk as often as they punish it. No mercenary working in Gloomhaven should expect to be unscathed by the uncaring and ambivalent winds of fate. Rolling with the world's punches, whether it be by a nasty road event or the edge of a cultist's knife, is a necessary part of success. Failure and tough luck are opportunities for refinement, for better learning the ins and outs of your character and applying them in a way that benefits an individual scenario or the rest of your squad. Each of Gloomhaven's mercenaries, as well as its villains, come with a deck of ability cards and a deck of attack modifier cards. Attack modifier cards, as the name suggests, modify your attacks. They can add or subtract damage and even supplement attacks with status effects. From outward appearance, ability cards are pretty straightforward. There's a top and bottom half, each with a different special action, as well as basic actions for attacking and moving at the top and bottom respectively. A mercenary's deck of ability cards, especially once you've gained a few levels, will contain all kinds of abilities that play off other abilities and can change the way that mercenary is played. But you're only allowed to include so many cards in your hand to bring with you into a scenario, and mercenaries come with a variety of hand sizes. Choosing cards that play off one another is important, as is understanding how you want to use a specific mercenary, and which abilities best fit that style. During a scenario at the beginning of each round, you take 2 cards from what's available in your hand and pick one of the center numbers as your initiative. Then your team's initiative numbers as well as enemy initiative numbers are announced and turns commence. When it's your turn, of the 4 actions available on your chosen cards, you perform 2 of them, and it must be the top action of one card and the bottom of the other. Once you've done your abilities, your chosen cards are discarded, and if a card has a lost symbol on it or a burn symbol in the game, it goes into your lost pile. You can regain cards from your discard pile through resting, though when doing this, one card will always be lost to your lost pile. Cards in your lost pile, for the most part, are gone for the remainder of that scenario. As you progress through a scenario, your hand slowly but surely dwindles. If you run out of cards to play, your mercenary becomes exhausted and is lost for the rest of the scenario. Now, Gloomhaven is not meant as an open information game. During a scenario, you won't, or at least shouldn't, know what specific actions your teammates are going to take, nor what number they've chosen as their initiative. Gloomhaven's difficulty and brilliance partially originates here. Knowing the best cards to play for your character is one thing. Knowing how to adapt to changing circumstances and bad luck is another thing. But as you get to know your character, learn how enemies operate, and get into the groove of Gloomhaven's cutthroat rhythm, scenario rounds become Zach Galifianakis levels of strategy and contingency planning, not only for what enemies might do, but what your allies' plans are too. It's good to communicate with your teammates a general idea of what your plan is, as well as if your chosen initiative is high or low. You might say something like, "I'm going to attack this guy and I have a pretty high initiative," or maybe "I won't be attacking this round and I'll only be moving." During a round, your plan may be foiled by a monster that draws a higher initiative or by a player that does the action you were going to do. And that's where you'll need to adapt, use your card's alternate abilities to make the best of a poor situation, or do an action that may not benefit you now, but could in the future. It is challenging, tons of fun, and especially early on, unforgiving. There is a lot to learn in Gloomhaven, not just how to best position yourself for victory, but learning the traits of your fellow mercenaries and enemies. As an example, a cultist's highest initiative is 10, and their lowest is 63, while Living Corpse's highest initiative is 21, and their lowest is 91. So chances are, if you're fighting a horde of living corpses, it's probably safe to pick some higher initiatives. And this is stuff you learn through repetition and gameplay, by crawling through dungeons, encountering new enemies with different strengths and weaknesses. It's the same case for your party members too. Some mercenaries have higher initiatives and others lower. The more you play with a party, the more you'll understand each mercenary's traits. If a party member is playing as the Enoch's Brute and they say, "I have a very high initiative this round," after some time playing together, you can probably guess what they're talking about. That's something you lose when you're adventuring on your own. When you've got command of 4 mercenaries instead of 1, it obviously becomes much easier to coordinate moves since you're coordinating with yourself. And honestly, I prefer Gloomhaven the old-fashioned way. An integral part of the challenge is adapting to changing circumstances. And once you can adapt, once you know your enemies well enough to play to their weaknesses and outwit their strengths, or work well enough with teammates without outright saying what your actions will be, to say the feeling is satisfying is an understatement. As your mercenaries level up and new ones unlock, this process continues. Mercenary parties in Gloomhaven are like puzzles, and learning how to fit the pieces together won't stop as long as new mercenaries and abilities get added to the fold. Variety is the spice of life, and in Gloomhaven it's downright a law of nature. Mercenaries don't just have different roles and hand sizes, but also different speeds and attack modifiers. The Enoch's Brute is likely familiar to anyone who's ever played any kind of RPG, a towering tank who can deal as much damage as he can take, a good candidate for opening doors and revealing what enemies await on the other side. On the other end of the spectrum is one of my personal favorites, the Quattro Soothsinger. The Soothsinger is a bard with some really powerful buffs that can completely change the dynamics of a dungeon crawl. Just don't get her into a fight. The Soothsinger is a little more difficult to play than the Brute, if not more irregular. She starts with 6 health, low enough that quite a few enemies can end her entire musical career with a single attack. Her buffs and abilities are spread between the bottom and top of her cards, and because moving is the basic ability on the bottom half of cards, you may be forced to choose between keeping up with the squad or casting a spell and falling a bit behind. Depending on the scenario, this could just be an annoyance, but it could also lead to some serious serious trouble. Scenarios that require your party to dash through long halls and not get caught in constant combat can be difficult for the Soothsinger, at least they were in my experience. I desperately want to say that I love all of Gloomhaven's mercenaries, but that's just not the case. I don't think there are any bad mercenaries, though some are definitely more useful and easier to learn than others. The first mercenary I took into battle was the Savas Cragheart. The Cragheart has a really interesting mix of ranged and melee attacks, enough health to do some light tanking, and is pretty mobile, but early on some of his attack and move abilities damage both adjacent enemies and allies. Balancing all that is tough, especially for a player just dipping their toes into Gloomhaven for the first time. I've found it tough to fit the Cragheart into parties that aren't constantly on the move or separated, especially as you work in mercenaries like the inaccurate, Quattro Soothsinger, and Sawbones, each of whom have some really nice buffs for adjacent allies. The Cragheart's mix of mobility and tanking also make him an excellent candidate to open doors, too. As mundane an action as it is in everyday life, the danger of opening doors in Gloomhaven is on par with bomb disposal. Enemies on the other side, once revealed, get their ability card drawn, and if its initiative is lower than the mercenary that opened the door, they take their turn immediately after, which can spell all kinds of trouble. Kick in the door with the Cragheart and you'll probably be able to hold off the baddies long enough for the rest of your party to regroup and move through. I definitely have a soft spot for my Rocky Boy, partially because he just looks really cool, and I haven't given up working him into parties just yet. Gaining a better understanding of how a mercenary works is an extremely rewarding challenge, especially considering the vast differences in playstyle and play difficulty these mercenaries are quite literally packaged with. There is a deep satisfaction in becoming proficient with a mercenary that rivals the great learning curves of some of my other favorite games. As cruel an RPG Gloomhaven can be, it incentivizes continuous self-evaluation. Failing a scenario doesn't come without a silver lining. If your mercenaries exhaust themselves of cards or get bested by stronger enemies, any XP points earned during the scenario, as well as any looted gold, you get to keep. When faced with an untenable situation, it's not a bad idea for mercenaries to break formation, grab all the gold they can, and burn any cards that give them XP before being defeated. And afterward, mercenaries dust themselves off, refresh their cards, and can take a second shot at that scenario, now with an idea of what to expect. That little bit of mercy encourages repetition and lessens the blow of scenarios when enemies do a ton of damage right off the bat and set your squad back before things have really even begun. The PC version's Guildmaster mode is an extension of this player convenience, moving you away from the idea of controlling one individual mercenary to controlling and managing a mercenary company, or, guild. Guildmaster is a structural reorganization of campaign mode, although I'd say it tends to feel closer to dumping Gloomhaven's box onto a table and playing with all the toys you find. It's a reorganization that's appropriate for Guildmaster's intended purpose, which is for players to master all of Gloomhaven's rules and mercenaries. The result is an experience that moves at a different pace, and one I'm not sure I like more than campaign mode. There are, ostensibly, over 100 new quests, and lots of fun unvoiced dialogue from new characters. Combat stays the same, but scenarios are, at least early on, easier to get a grip of. You're still killing bad guys, but a few scenarios are set in a single room, meaning you don't have to keep your squad moving into opening doors, and some require you only survive a certain number of rounds. If you're like me and the mystery of what's inside some of these boxes burns away at your soul, Guildmaster will definitely help alleviate that too. In campaign mode, new mercenaries choose one personal quest from 2 randomly dealt personal quest cards. Only once that personal quest is fulfilled is the mercenary with the matching symbol on the card unlocked. The mercenary that fulfilled their personal quest is retired and cannot be used in any more scenarios. The rulebook even says the character has accomplished his or her dreams, which is kind of funny considering the conditions on these cards, but hey, I don't judge. I really like this sense of autonomy where Gloomhaven separates the player from the world. Once a mercenary retires, they become a memory, their character sheet a small historical record of their adventures. Personal quests can be easy and they can be difficult. They can take a few scenarios or they can take numerous scenarios. Overall, it's fairly random how long unlocking new mercenaries can take in Gloomhaven, but it probably won't happen quickly. In Guildmaster mode, all it takes to unlock new mercenaries is completing various challenges, some of which are fairly simple. Chances are, spend a few hours in Guildmaster mode and you'll quickly wind up with a few new mercenaries and party comps to experiment with. And there's no worrying about them retiring at an early age either. they work for you forever. Additionally, before every scenario, mercenaries get dealt battle goal cards, which come with little side challenges to complete during that scenario. In campaign mode, completing a battle goal card allows you to improve your attack modifier deck. In Guildmaster mode, battle goal cards reward XP points. Not many, but enough that they can help improve mercenaries. I'm not one to complain about new things, especially new mercenaries, but unlocking so many so quickly in Guildmaster mode, along with the quicker pace at which they level up, means you'll quickly accumulate a ton of homework to do on ability cards and playstyles. Through personal quests, campaign mode, in a sense, incentivizes you to play the first character you choose. By limiting the amount of mercenaries available early on, you're encouraged to really get to know your mercenary and how they work alongside your other party members. And chances are, new mercenaries in campaign mode won't start at level 1 either, so unlocking a new mercenary doesn't mean you'll be playing catch up with other higher level mercenaries in your party. In Guildmaster mode, the pace at which current mercenaries level up, paired with how often you unlock additional mercenaries, becomes too much of a good thing, partially because mercenaries here do start at level 1. Now, players can choose scenario difficulty in Gloomhaven, and even make scenarios easier, though this lessens the rewards you get, like gold and XP. But it's not impossible to play with a group of mercenaries at different levels without lowering the difficulty. That said, in Guildmaster mode, new mercenaries still have fewer cards to build their hand out of, and their attack modifier deck isn't as developed. If you're used to higher level characters and the variety of cards and abilities that come with that, and suddenly you're trying to work in a new mercenary with a less versatile or powerful set of cards, it can feel somewhat dissuading. What does help this a little is that all gold is shared, as opposed to campaign mode where mercenaries have their own individual gold amounts. This benefits late incoming mercenaries, as not only do they have access to gear and upgrades you've previously unlocked, but you can equip them with the gold your squad's accumulated. Again, Guildmaster is an attempt to be, and is, more accessible. I guess if you're compacting a 4-player co-op game with a ton of content into a more conventional video game context, some of this is to be expected. And I do enjoy Guildmaster mode a lot. While some of its scenarios get repetitive, their layouts are also procedurally generated. Try a scenario for a second time and room orientation, doors, and obstacles all change up, which alleviates some of that repetitiveness. With Gloomhaven's physical edition, depending on how you and your pals set up scenarios, seeing their layouts was usually a hint to how quickly your mercenaries would need to move. If there were only a few rooms, you're probably good to take your time. If the scenario has a long hallway or something similar, you're probably going to have to keep moving as much as you're fighting. Launching a scenario in Guildmaster and not knowing what the exact layout will be is legitimately exciting, another element of randomness that could benefit you or your enemies. I do wonder how Guildmaster mode lands for first-time players. Having played much of Gloomhaven beforehand, I was able to hit the ground running and had a solid understanding of how to work many of the new mercenaries in, as well as knowing what comps I wanted to shoot for. Campaign mode is more difficult, but that makes Gloomhaven's learning process so much more satisfying. Not to mention, you can name your mercenaries, something you can't currently do in Guildmaster mode. I'll probably always prefer Gloomhaven's physical version, even with its multitude of tokens and boxed stuff. The PC version is great and well made, but it's tough to compare anything to opening a new mercenary's box, dumping the contents, and getting all giddy over their possible uses and synergies. At once, an unveiled mystery becomes a challenge to learn and master. And if that's not enough, you also get a cool mini.